Good day, gentlemen. Dirk here on the MGTOW Solution. I've got some more snowshoe footage to provide the backdrop while I yak at you today about contributors and users. I got to thinking recently about the kinds of people I prefer to associate with and why. It's pretty simple. I prefer the company of people who are productive and motivated. People who are goal-oriented and self-disciplined. Basically, people that provide some kind of benefit to the world. And that's one way to categorize people. Those who are a net gain for humanity and those who are a net loss. You could call them contributors and users. And you could think of contributors as those who, all things considered, give more than they take, and users as those who take more than they give. And I don't mean just money or goods, but also knowledge, time, emotional energy, creativity, pretty much anything that has a positive or negative impact in the world. Financially, we already know that as a group, women are a net loss, while men as a group are a net gain in modern society. Women take out more benefits from the government than they put in the form of taxes, and of course, the reverse is true for men. And there are obviously a lot of women who pay a lot of taxes while receiving no financial support from the government, but that's really just another example of the NOWALT argument. As a group, women are users, at least financially, while men are contributors. But there are plenty of men who milk government entitlements for all they're worth too, while contributing far less over their lifetime than they take. Regardless of that fact, it's the efforts of men collectively that keep society afloat economically. We're obviously pushing those limits these days, but if it weren't for hardworking taxpayers, we'd have gone bankrupt long ago. Obviously, a civilization needs other things besides money. It needs people to protect it, for one. And Terrence Popp pointed out that we have 5 layers of protection in the U.S. The first line of defense is the city police, followed by the county sheriffs, the state police, the FBI, and finally the U.S. military at the international level. These functions are performed mostly by men. That's 5 layers of protection provided by people who put themselves at physical risk in order to keep the majority of us safe from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And they do so for relatively low pay. They're contributors, without question. These people are a net gain for society, just like most people who work for a living and take responsibility for their own lives. These are the kinds of people I enjoy being around. When I look at my history of friendships, the most meaningful ones are always with people who work hard and play hard. They're mature, responsible, and truly independent. And their hard work always benefits others, whether they do it as a job or as a volunteer. The kind of people who donate blood or step up to help in a crisis. Basically, they're people with character. And for me, it's always been the same way at work. Most of us have worked with people who are just looking to collect a paycheck while expending as little effort as possible. You know the type. They just perform well enough to keep them out of trouble so they can keep their job. They do the bare minimum or even less if they can get away with it. Such people are guided entirely by their own self-interest. In my experience, those who have their shit together at work generally also have their shit together outside of work, and these people make better climbing partners, to cite one example, but they're generally just better people to be around. Individuals with a strong work ethic are generally more reliable across the board. The incompetent and lazy ones who are always dropping the ball at work are the same people who will cancel some planned weekend activity at the last minute, inconveniencing others without a second thought. So I've found it useful to limit my contact with such people as much as possible, and instead surround myself with people who actually have a positive impact on others. In the case where I've come across a mix of people in social situations, the people I don't hit it off with often turn out to be users. A good example is from a climbing club that I was a part of a while back. Some of the people were great, but others, not so much. There was one young woman who was exceptionally full of herself, and it turned out she was a trust fund kid who had never worked a real job. Then there was a guy who wouldn't shut up about how unfair it was that he couldn't survive by working part-time and felt the government should do something about it. The people in that group that I hit it off with all turned out to be construction workers or something, and some of those guys ended up being great friends. Theoretically, you could think of it like everyone on the planet is either a net contributor or a net user. Either they make the world a better place in some way, or they don't. And again, a starving artist could easily be a contributor, even if they don't produce much financially. So one question might be, are there more contributors or users in the world? There's really no way to know because it's somewhat subjective. One person's hero is another person's villain, depending on their beliefs. For example, there are those who believe military personnel do more harm than good, but that eco-terrorism is a noble cause. Their evaluation is going to be very different than mine. But we do know that the ratio of contributors to users is much higher among men than women. I think any reasonable person would agree that a mom who leaves her husband and then relies entirely on him and the state to support her indefinitely is a user. And I realize there are a shitload of people who would disagree with that statement, but I said any reasonable person. And a reasonable alternative might be for a man to take custody of a child, but even if he offers to do so with no expectation of financial assistance from her or the state, he'll still usually be opposed by both of them. This happens all the time. The idea of men getting custody of their own children is simply considered unacceptable in most cases. Because men are generally contributors by nature, they're expected to play that role at all times, whether it benefits them or not. This is because it's assumed that men are capable, which we generally are. But it makes you kind of wonder, what happened to the argument that women are every bit as capable as men? Divorce court demonstrates that they aren't, so it would behoove feminists, in the name of equality, to change the system to one where women are held to the same standards as men. If a single dad can support his family without outside assistance, why can't a woman? But we know that feminists will do no such thing because feminism isn't about equality, no matter how much they say it is. Women take more out of state coffers than they contribute because collectively they're users, and they're absolutely fine with that. At the risk of stating the obvious, this isn't limited to finances. Take the emotional health of their own children, for example. During a divorce, women commonly use the children as weapons against the father, despite the fact that this isn't in the child's best interest. It's another example of a woman doing more harm than good, and actually making the world a worse place for everyone involved except her. She's an emotional user, driven by manipulative instinct to get whatever she wants, regardless of the impact on other people. Of course, a lot of men are users too, and this has become more common than it used to be because the entitlement mentality has infected large portions of the population, thanks in large part to single feminist moms. A lot of people consider it perfectly acceptable to be a freeloader. Some even view it as a right. I attribute much of this to the absence of male role models at home in recent decades, due to the expanding rates of both divorce and women getting pregnant while single. More boys are being raised by single mothers, and so are learning their mother's values, while the father's influence is deliberately minimized or eliminated entirely. The whole "men aren't necessary" experiment is failing miserably. It's proving to be a disaster for men, women, children, and civilization in general. Yet, we never hear about the gender of children being considered in custody battles, even though it should be obvious that boys might be better off living with their fathers and visiting their moms on weekends. The default position is for children to go with the mother, regardless of gender. Period. And part of that problem is created by the delusion that there is no such thing as gender, or that there are 71 different genders, all equally valid. Boys are told this, often from a young age, and with concurrent vilification of masculinity, they end up believing that they should have the same privileges as women and none of the responsibilities of men. They're taught to be users. Many women are indoctrinating their sons in feminist ideology, which gets reinforced in school, the media, and entertainment. This has led to a push towards socialism in America. Socialism encourages people to be users, and a lot of them seem to like the idea of simply being provided for. The problem is that it's responsible men who are expected to pick up the tab, because they're contributors. The reasoning seems to be that they should be responsible for taking care of others simply because they're capable of doing so. It's like, I'm lazy, but you're not, so you owe me. It's the same mentality we see demonstrated by almost all women during a divorce. They feel entitled to the man's current and future resources because he's more capable of securing resources than she is. So, to her, this is simple logic. Never mind about equality in this case. And while most men feel a need to be self-sufficient, most women don't. They don't care. With that kind of mindset, there's nothing wrong with being a user, because all the contributors are capable of picking up their slack, and therefore should be required to do so. Karl Marx famously stated in 1875, quote, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs," end quote. That idea sounds great to people claiming they have needs, but not so much to those with abilities. Most people are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, but if given the option of having someone else take care of them, many will choose it. This is consistent with feminist dogma, where women have needs that must be met by those with the ability to meet them, which of course is men. We're already doing this, as demonstrated by the entitlements and taxes situation described above. Karen Strawn put it well when she stated simply, "Feminism is socialism in panties." And communism, socialism, and feminism are all on the same page. This should be of concern to all men because we're the ones who will be expected to bear the majority of that immense financial burden. There are already people pushing for another bachelor tax, so that even MGTOW and other single men will be forced to provide for people who prefer not to work. Meanwhile, I think the best course of action for men is to refuse to support this dysfunctional system as much as possible and get the most out of their individual lives by putting themselves first and protecting their own resources. Avoiding the marriage trap, the common law trap, and the pregnancy trap will go a long way towards enabling men to benefit from their own efforts while remaining productive members of society. This forces some people who are users to start contributing, or at least to get to the break-even point where they're taking care of themselves, because there's one less man enabling them. This is, after all, exactly what feminists have been clamoring for, their full independence. At least, that's what they've been saying, so let's give it to them. The next time a woman expects something from you for no other reason than you're a man and she's a woman, you might consider simply stating something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you change your flat tire because I'm a masculist," which means I believe women need to demonstrate equal responsibility to go along with the equal rights that they already enjoy. That way, they can become truly empowered, actualized human beings. And I wouldn't want to deny you that, so the answer is no. But you go, girl, change that tire. And yeah, she'll just find a white knight, but at least you can make your point. I'm just stating the obvious here, and I suspect that most men who have taken the red pill intuitively know to stay away from deadbeats, freeloaders, parasites, and other such burdens on society. These people, whether men or women, have nothing to offer you or anyone else. The trick is, in the case of women, they can attempt to hide their parasitic nature behind fake-up and cleavage, and it's up to the individual man to see through it. This is where MGTOW have an edge over the schmucks who consistently fall for it. Not that it's easy, but it can be done. However, this ruse continues to work brilliantly for countless women who know that their sexual appeal can offset their parasitic nature, and so cause them to be perceived as contributors, because, after all, they have a vagina to contribute, and doesn't that more than make up for everything else? In the eyes of most men, the answer is yes. And so here we are, living in a feminocracy. But in the eyes of awakened men, the answer is clearly no. Being female doesn't give you a pass, at least not with the small segment of men who understand female nature in all its hypergamous, manipulative glory. There are still plenty of men willing to play that game, but more of us are seeing the light every day and simply rejecting the idea that we owe females anything. Stick with the winners, gentlemen. I'm going to close this one out with a little segment I shot on this snowshoe hike. It's just a little representation of how much better my life has been since leaving the plantation. So I'm standing in the forest, and I've been hiking around on snowshoes. And when I'm not moving and it's quiet, I can hear birds. The weather's pretty good today for the dead of winter. And it's peaceful. And I know that my whole day is going to be peaceful. I don't have to go home and report into anybody. There's a couple of things I have to get done, but I can do them whenever I want to. And when I get those things done, I'm the one that benefits from it. And after that, I'll do whatever I want. Because that's how my life is now. It wasn't always this way, because I was married. But that's the way it is now, and that's the way it's going to stay. Because I value my freedom. And I'll never sacrifice it again.